America stopped building the one fighter it might need most today. It has the F-35. It has combat drones coming. It even has the F-47 on the horizon. But when the conversation turns to surviving the first days of a war with a major power, one aircraft still refuses to leave the room. The F-22 Raptor. That is the strange thing about the Raptor. It is not new anymore. It is not in production. It was never exported. It exists in small numbers. It is expensive to maintain, difficult to modernize, and old enough that the Air Force has spent years trying to decide how and when to move beyond it. But moving beyond the F-22 has turned out to be much harder than expected. If you enjoy military aviation stories like this, consider subscribing. This channel is all about the aircraft, programs, and decisions that shaped modern air power. Because the Raptor is not just another stealth fighter. It is the aircraft America built for a very specific kind of war, a high-end fight for control of the sky, against an enemy that could not simply be overwhelmed by older jets, better pilots, or more aircraft carriers. For a while, that war seemed like it might never come. The Cold War ended. The Soviet Union disappeared. The United States spent the next 2 decades flying over Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, and other battlefields where American aircraft rarely had to fight their way through enemy fighters to survive. And in that world, the F-22 looked almost too specialized, too expensive, too rare, too much airplane for the wars America was actually fighting. But history has a way of making old decisions feel new again. Today, the United States is not thinking only about counterinsurgency or permissive airspace. It is thinking about China, the Indo-Pacific, long-range missiles, stealth fighters, integrated air defenses, drones, electronic warfare, and the enormous distances between American bases and the battle space. And suddenly, the airplane that once looked like a Cold War answer without a question has become one of the most important bridges to the future. That is why the F-22 is so difficult to replace. Not because it is perfect, not because it is untouchable, not because no other fighter can do anything it does, but because the F-22 sits in a very uncomfortable place. It is too old to be the future, too rare to be comfortable, too expensive to rebuild, and still too capable to simply walk away from. The story of the F-22 begins with a fear that most people today have almost forgotten. The fear that American air superiority could not be taken for granted. For decades after World War II, the United States built its entire way of war around the idea that it could control the air. Bombers, tankers, surveillance aircraft, command aircraft, helicopters, ships at sea, soldiers on the ground. All of them depended in some way on the ability of American fighters to keep enemy aircraft away. If that air superiority failed, everything else became harder. That was the world the Raptor was designed for. The F-22 was not built as a general-purpose airplane first. It was not built to be a cheap export fighter. It was not built to be the most practical answer to every mission. It was built around a much narrower and more demanding idea. Enter contested airspace, find the enemy first, shoot first, and survive long enough to do it again. That is why the Air Force has always described the Raptor as something more than a normal fighter. Its strength is not one single feature. It is the combination. Stealth, supercruise, maneuverability, integrated avionics. Those words get repeated so often that they can start to sound like marketing language. But together, they explain why the F-22 still matters. Stealth is not magic. It does not make an aircraft invisible. What it does is reduce the distance at which enemy sensors can reliably detect, track, and target the aircraft. In air combat, distance is time, and time is everything. If one fighter can see, classify, and engage before the other fighter even has a complete picture. The fight is already tilted. That was the first part of the Raptor's design philosophy. The second was speed. The F-22 can supercruise, meaning it can fly at supersonic speed without relying on fuel-hungry afterburners. That matters because afterburners are loud, hot, and inefficient. They can give a fighter tremendous speed, but at a cost. They burn fuel quickly, reduce range, and create a massive infrared signature. Supercruise gives the Raptor something different. It lets the aircraft move fast without paying the same penalty. It can cover distance quickly, reposition, press an attack, or disengage with a kind of efficiency older fighters simply were not designed to match. And then there is maneuverability. The F-22's engines use thrust vectoring, allowing the jet to point and control itself in ways that conventional fighters struggle to match at high angles and low speeds. This does not mean every fight becomes a slow-speed airshow maneuver. Modern air combat is much more complex than that. But it does mean the Raptor was designed to keep options open across a wide flight envelope. It could fight at range. It could maneuver up close. It could fly high and fast. It could carry weapons internally to preserve its low observable profile. It could use its sensors to build a picture of the airspace without forcing the pilot to work through a cluttered mess of disconnected information. And that last part is easy to overlook. The F-22 was not just a stealthy airplane with powerful engines. It was one of the first fighters built around the idea that the pilot should not have to manually stitch the battle together from separate displays and separate sensors. The aircraft was supposed to help fuse that information into something usable. That is what made it so different when it arrived. The Raptor was not just faster than older fighters. It was not just harder to see. It was designed to change the order of the fight. But here is where the story gets complicated. America built the fighter it wanted for a future war. Then the future changed. By the time the F-22 entered service, the world it had been designed for no longer looked the same. The Soviet Union was gone. Russia was weaker than expected. China's Air Force was still modernizing. And the wars America was actually fighting were not wars where enemy stealth fighters were the main problem. In Iraq and Afghanistan, the United States needed endurance, surveillance, precision strike, close air support, drones, tankers, logistics, and aircraft that could orbit for hours over troops on the ground. The F-22 could perform air-to-ground missions, but that was not the reason it existed. Sending the most advanced air dominance fighter in the world into an environment with no enemy fighter threat did not always make sense. So the Raptor became a paradox. It was arguably the most capable air superiority fighter on Earth, but it was born into an era where America did not urgently need to prove it in the role it had been built for. And when that happens in defense programs, cost becomes impossible to ignore. The F-22 was expensive. Its technology was sensitive. It was never exported. There was no large international customer base to keep production humming. And as the F-35 program grew, the argument for buying more Raptors became harder to sustain inside a budget that had many other demands. So, America made the decision that still shapes the F-22's story today. It stopped building them. The final F-22 rolled off Lockheed Martin's assembly line in 2011 and was delivered in 2012. The operational fleet was completed at 187 jets. Across the entire program, including test and development aircraft, 195 F-22s were produced. That number is the heart of the problem. For a normal aircraft, 187 might sound like a lot. For an aircraft meant to guarantee air dominance across multiple theaters, rotate through deployments, train pilots, absorb maintenance downtime, survive accidents, receive upgrades, and still be ready for a major war, it is not a comfortable number. The most important thing about the F-22 may not be what it can do. It may be how few of them America actually built. Because once production ended, The Raptor became something more fragile than its performance suggested. Every aircraft mattered more. Every squadron mattered more. Every modernization decision became more difficult. And every discussion about retirement became tied to a bigger question. If you remove these jets, what replaces their actual role? Not their public image. Their role. That distinction matters. It is easy to say that newer aircraft exist. It is much harder to replace a specific combination of stealth, speed, altitude, kinematics, pilot training, weapons integration, and air dominance doctrine that was built into a small fleet and then locked in place when the production line closed. And that leads to the obvious question: why not just build more? On the surface, it sounds simple. If the F-22 is still valuable, reopen the line. Build an updated version. Give it newer avionics, better sensors, modern coatings, improved networking, and produce enough of them to solve the numbers problem. But aircraft production does not work like restarting an old machine in a warehouse. A fighter is not only an airframe, it is an industrial ecosystem. It is tooling, suppliers, specialized materials, software, manufacturing knowledge, test infrastructure, trained workers, classified processes, engine production, avionics integration, maintenance pipelines, and 1,000 small things that disappear when a line closes. By 2017, when the idea of restarting F-22 production was examined, the numbers were brutal. Estimates reported at the time suggested that building 194 additional F-22s could cost around $50 billion. Nearly $10 billion of that was associated with non-recurring restart costs before the aircraft themselves were even counted. And even then, the question would not be whether America could build the same F-22 again. The real question would be whether it should. Because a new-build Raptor would not simply be the old jet. It would almost certainly need modern electronics, updated software, new threat libraries, new communications, new maintainability improvements, and changes to fit a world that has moved on since the aircraft was designed. At some point, restarting the F-22 begins to look less like restarting production, and more like creating a new fighter program around an old design. And that is exactly the problem. The F-22 is too valuable to ignore, but too expensive to reproduce in a simple way. It is the kind of aircraft that makes people ask, why didn't we build more? And then makes the answer painfully complicated. For years, this was an uncomfortable but manageable problem. The United States had the F-22. It had the F-35 coming in large numbers. It had upgraded F-15s and F-16s. It had tankers, AWACS, electronic warfare aircraft, satellites, bases, carriers, and allies. The air dominance problem looked difficult, but not urgent enough to force a full rethink. Then China changed the scale of the question. The China problem is not simply that China has a stealth fighter. It is not just that the J-20 exists. It is not a clean one-on-one duel between two aircraft in an empty sky. Real wars are not clean duels. The Indo-Pacific is enormous. Distances are punishing. Bases are fewer and farther apart. Tankers become critical. Runways become targets. Ships have to operate inside missile ranges. Fighters have to cover huge areas while facing integrated air defenses, long-range air-to-air missiles, electronic warfare, cyber operations, drones, and a military that has spent decades studying how the United States fights. That is why the F-22 matters again. The Department of Defense has described China as America's pacing challenge. That phrase matters because it means China is not treated as a side problem or a regional inconvenience. It is the benchmark against which future American military capability is being measured. And, in the air, China is no longer the force it was when the F-22 program was being cut. The J-20 is operational. Chinese production capacity has grown. The People's Liberation Army Air Force has been modernizing with new fighters, better sensors, long-range missiles, and a larger ecosystem of support aircraft and air defenses. The 2024 China Military Power Report notes that China is preparing upgrades for the J-20 that may include carrying more air-to-air missiles in a low observable configuration, adding thrust vectoring nozzles, and improving supercruise capability with higher thrust indigenous engines. None of that means the J-20 is automatically superior to the F-22. It does not mean every Chinese claim should be accepted at face value. It does not mean the United States has suddenly lost control of the air, but it does mean the environment has changed. The F-22 was created for a world where America needed to defeat advanced enemy fighters and open the door for the rest of the force. For a time, that mission felt like a leftover from another era. Now it looks much more relevant. And this is where the numbers become uncomfortable again. A small fleet can be elite. A small fleet can be terrifying in the right place at the right time. But in the Pacific, even elite aircraft have to cross enormous distances. They have to be maintained. They have to train. They have to deploy. They have to be available when needed. They have to survive not just air combat, but the logistics of a theater where bases and tankers are part of the fight. So the question is not simply, can an F-22 beat a J-20? The better question is, what happens when America's rarest air dominance fighter has to cover the largest possible battlefield? That question does not have a comfortable answer. And it is why the F-22 remains so important, even as newer aircraft enter the force. The obvious aircraft to bring up here is the F-35. And to be clear, the F-35 is not a consolation prize. It is not a failed replacement. It is not simply less than the F-22. It is one of the most important combat aircraft ever built, and in many ways it represents a different idea of air power. The F-35 is a stealthy, multi-role fighter with extraordinary sensors, sensor fusion, data sharing, electronic warfare capability, and the ability to act as a node in a larger network. It was designed to replace large numbers of older aircraft, including the F-16 and A-10 in the Air Force. And it is built around the idea that the pilot should have an incredibly rich picture of the battle space. In a modern war, that matters enormously. An F-35 does not have to be the fastest or most agile aircraft in every situation to be decisive. Its value comes from seeing, understanding, sharing, and surviving in advanced threat environments. It can find targets. It can pass information. It can support other assets. It can strike. It can help coordinate the fight in ways older aircraft simply cannot. So this is not an F-22 versus F-35 argument in the simple internet sense. The F-35 changed how pilots see the battlefield. The F-22 changed how enemies survive inside it. Those are different strengths. The F-35 is broader. The F-22 is narrower. The F-35 is more connected. The F-22 was built more purely around the violent problem of taking control of the air against the most advanced threats of its time. That is why the F-35 does not fully replace the F-22. It can perform air-to-air missions. It can be extremely dangerous in them. It brings modern sensors and networking that the Raptor was never originally designed around in the same way. But the F-22's combination of stealth, speed, altitude, maneuverability, and air dominance design still occupies a specific space. The F-35 is the aircraft you want everywhere. The F-22 is the aircraft you still want when the first job is to kick open the sky. And in a high-end war, those are not the same requirement. This is why replacing the Raptor has never been as simple as pointing to another fifth-generation fighter and saying the job is done. The Air Force knows this. That is why the future is supposed to be something beyond both the F-22 and the F-35 in their current forms. That future is the next-generation air dominance program, and the crewed fighter at the center of that effort has now been identified as the F-47. On paper, this is the answer. The F-47 is intended to move American air dominance into the sixth-generation era. It is not supposed to be just a single aircraft replacing another single aircraft. It is part of a family of systems, which means the fighter is expected to work with drones, sensors, weapons, networks, and other platforms in a much larger architecture. That matters because the next air war may not be won by one exquisite fighter alone. It may be won by the aircraft that can command, coordinate, survive, and fight inside a system of crewed and uncrewed platforms. In that sense, the F-47 is not just a replacement for the F-22. It is supposed to be the next way of thinking about air dominance. But there is a difference between a program being announced and a force being ready. And that difference is where the F-22 remains trapped in the story. The F-47 may be the future, but futures do not arrive all at once. They have to be designed, tested, produced, integrated, maintained, trained on, and deployed in meaningful numbers. Even optimistic timelines leave a gap between the aircraft America wants and the aircraft America can rely on today. That gap is the Raptor's problem. Or maybe more accurately, it is America's problem. In 2026, a leading lawmaker said the F-47 and the Navy's F/A-XX would not be available until the mid-2030s, which means older fighters have to keep flying in the meantime. For the Air Force, that means the F-22 is not just a legacy aircraft waiting to retire, it is a bridge. And bridges matter most when there is no other way across. The F-47 may be the answer. But answers that arrive in the mid-2030s do not solve the problem of the late 2020s. That is why the Air Force is still investing in the Raptor. If the F-22 were truly finished, if it were simply an aging relic waiting for replacement, the modernization choices would look very different. Instead, the aircraft is being pushed to remain relevant against threats that did not exist in the same form when it first entered service. One of the clearest examples is the move to integrate a next-generation infrared defensive sensor system, known as IRDS, using TAC-IRST sensors. In 2025, Lockheed Martin received a $270 million contract to add these infrared defensive sensors to the F-22. That might sound like a technical footnote, but it says something important. The Raptor was designed around a particular era of stealth, radar, and beyond visual range combat. But the modern battle space is increasingly complex. Aircraft have to worry about advanced missiles, passive detection, infrared signatures, electronic warfare, low observable threats, and enemies that may try to deny or deceive radar-based systems. Infrared sensing is valuable because it gives another way to detect and track threats. It does not replace radar. It does not solve every problem, but it adds another layer, and in high-end combat, layers are everything. This is the larger story of F-22 modernization. The Raptor is being asked to survive long enough to hand the mission to something else. That is a difficult role for any aircraft. It means staying lethal while aging. It means adding modern sensors to an airframe that was not designed with unlimited upgrade space. It means improving communications without compromising stealth. It means adapting to new threats without turning the aircraft into something too expensive to operate. And it means accepting a very uncomfortable truth. The F-22 was supposed to age out. Instead, it is being taught how to hunt in a new war. That same tension shows up in one of the strangest debates around the Raptor, the Block 20 aircraft. The Block 20 F-22s are older jets used primarily for training. They are not upgraded to the same level as the more modern Block 30 and Block 35 aircraft. In a simple world, retiring them would make sense. If they are less capable, if they are expensive to fly, if the Air Force wants to move money toward future systems, then why keep them? But the F-22 does not live in a simple world. The Government Accountability Office looked at the Air Force's proposal to divest 32 Block 20 F-22s and found that the service had not fully documented the implications. The issue was not just whether those aircraft were frontline combat jets. The issue was what happens to training, testing, and the rest of the fleet if those aircraft go away. Because if you retire training aircraft, the training mission does not disappear. It moves somewhere else. If the Block 20s are gone, more modern combat-coded aircraft may have to pick up additional training or testing duties. That can mean more wear, more maintenance demand, and less availability for the very aircraft the Air Force most needs ready for a high-end fight. That is why even the less capable Raptors are hard to let go. It is not because every F-22 is equally valuable in every mission. It is because the fleet is small, and small fleets have very little slack. When there are not enough aircraft, even imperfect aircraft become part of the structure holding the force together. The strangest proof that America cannot easily replace the F-22 is that even the training Raptors are hard to retire. That tells you something about the real problem. The issue is not only capability, it is capacity. America has to think not just about the best jet on the best day, but about how many are available, how many pilots are trained, how many aircraft are down for maintenance, how many are being upgraded, how many are needed for testing, and how many can actually deploy when a crisis begins. The F-22 is a masterpiece wrapped inside a math problem. And the math is not kind. The Raptor's combat record also adds another strange layer to the story. For an aircraft with such a fearsome reputation, the F-22 did not build its legend through a long list of air-to-air kills. It spent years as a deterrent, a training standard, a strategic signal, and an aircraft that often did its most important work simply by existing. Its first combat use came in 2014 during strikes in Syria against ISIS. F-22s struck a command and control facility near Raqqa, marking the first time the fifth-generation fighter had been used in combat. That mission is important because it shows how the F-22's value is not limited to dogfighting. The Raptor was used in an environment where air defenses and uncertainty mattered. It could penetrate, strike, and operate in a way that reduced risk. Even when it was dropping GPS-guided bombs instead of hunting enemy fighters, the reason it was there was tied to the same thing that made it special: survivability in contested or uncertain airspace. Then came the episode that gave the Raptor its most unusual public kill. In 2023, an F-22 from the 1st Fighter Wing fired an AIM-9X Sidewinder and shot down a Chinese high-altitude surveillance balloon off the coast of South Carolina. The balloon fell into the water, and the U.S. Navy began recovering the debris. For a fighter built to destroy the most advanced aircraft on Earth, the Raptor's most famous public air-to-air kill was a balloon. That sounds almost absurd, but the event was not meaningless. The balloon incident was not a dogfight. It was not a test of the F-22's full capability. It did not prove that the Raptor was superior to anything in air combat. But symbolically, it pulled the aircraft back into the center of great power competition. A jet designed in the shadow of the Cold War had just been used in a public confrontation with the country now treated as America's pacing challenge. That is the kind of irony the F-22 seems to attract. It was built for a war that vanished, then preserved for a war that may be returning. It was so advanced that America protected it from export, but so expensive that America stopped producing it early. It was meant to dominate enemy fighters, but became famous to the public for shooting down a balloon. It is old enough to need replacement, but important enough that its replacement cannot arrive fast enough. And that is why the title of this story matters. The fighter America still cannot replace is not irreplaceable in a mythical sense. No aircraft is. Every machine ages. Every advantage narrows. Every design reflects the assumptions of the time in which it was built. The F-22 has limitations. Its fleet is small. Its range is a challenge in the Pacific. Its maintenance demands are real. Its upgrade path is more complicated than that of newer aircraft designed with more modern architectures. And eventually, The United States will need something that can do the Raptor's job across greater distances, with better networking, more adaptability, and deeper integration with uncrewed systems. That is what the F-47 is supposed to become. But the future does not erase the present. Right now, the F-22 still occupies a space no other American fighter fills in quite the same way. It is not the most numerous. It is not the newest. It is not the easiest to sustain. But it remains the aircraft most closely associated with the pure problem of air dominance against the hardest threats. The F-35 is essential. The F-47 is coming. Collaborative combat aircraft may change the balance of mass and risk. New sensors and weapons will reshape how air combat works. But until that future is real in squadrons, not just in announcements, the Raptor remains the bridge. And that raises a question. If America needs a fighter to bridge the gap until the F-47 arrives, should it still be the F-22? Let me know in the comments. And that bridge is carrying more weight than anyone expected when the last F-22 rolled off the line. The irony of the Raptor is that it became too expensive to keep building, but too important to simply let go. It is a fighter from a decision America cannot fully undo. It is a fleet too small to feel comfortable, and too capable to dismiss. It is a reminder that in military aviation, timing matters almost as much as technology. Build too many of the wrong aircraft, and you waste billions. Build too few of the right one, and decades later you may find yourself trying to stretch a small fleet across a very large problem. That is where the F-22 is now. It is not the whole answer to the future of air dominance, but it may be the aircraft America needs most while waiting for that answer to arrive. The F-22 was built to dominate a future war. Then America convinced itself that future had disappeared. Now that future is coming back, and the fighter America stopped building may be the one it still cannot afford to lose.